My name is Helena, and I'm 43 years old. I never thought meeting my son's fiancée would turn into one of the most humiliating and shocking experiences of my life. I've always believed that a mother's greatest joy is watching her child build a life of their own. My son, Daniel, was that joy for me. After his father passed away when Daniel was only 8, it was just the two of us against the world. Every decision I made revolved around him, his future, his happiness, his safety. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to make sure he never felt the absence of a father. And somehow, through all the struggles and long nights, we became more like best friends than just mother and son. Daniel grew into the kind of man any mother would be proud of. Kind, intelligent, respectful. So when he called me one evening sounding unusually excited, I could already sense what was coming. He said, "Mom, I want you to meet someone." My heart warmed instantly. He'd been dating a woman named Tiffany for nearly a year, and I'd heard her name sprinkled in casual conversations, but he had never brought her home. I smiled through the phone, trying to keep my tone calm even though my heart fluttered with nervous excitement. "Of course, honey, I'd love to meet her." "Great," he said cheerfully. "We'll come over this Saturday for dinner. Tiffany's been looking forward to meeting you." That week, I could barely focus on anything else. I spent hours planning the menu: Daniel's favorite roasted chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, and my special chocolate pie he'd loved since childhood. I wanted everything to be perfect. It wasn't just about impressing his girlfriend, it was about showing her the warmth of our little family. When Saturday arrived, I cleaned the house twice over, lit scented candles, and set the table with my best china. As the clock struck 6, I heard Daniel's familiar knock, followed by laughter, a woman's laughter. I opened the door, and there she was. Tiffany was stunning. Long blonde hair, flawless makeup, dressed in a silk blouse that probably cost more than my entire outfit. She smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that reached the eyes. It was practiced, like she'd perfected it in front of a mirror. "Mrs. Carter," she said sweetly, extending a hand. "It's so nice to finally meet you." "Oh, please, call me Helena," I said warmly, shaking her hand. Her smile tightened. "If you insist, ma'am." Ma'am. That single word hit me harder than I expected. I brushed it off, assuming she was just being formal, but something in her tone felt deliberately distant. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Daniel couldn't stop smiling, clearly thrilled to have us both together. Tiffany complimented the decor and the food, though her praise always carried an edge. When I mentioned that I'd made the pie from scratch, she giggled and said, "That's adorable. I didn't think people still did that." I laughed it off politely, but the remark stung. A few minutes later, when Daniel talked about how I'd raised him alone, she chimed in with, "Wow, that must have been exhausting. I can't imagine being that dependent on one person emotionally." Daniel didn't catch the insult. He just smiled proudly, squeezing her hand, while I sat there swallowing my discomfort. I tried to remind myself maybe she was nervous, maybe she didn't mean it that way. I wanted to give her a chance. But as the night went on, Tiffany's little comments kept piling up. When I mentioned my love for reading, she smirked and said she preferred real experiences to books. When I talked about my work, she asked in a sweet but condescending tone, "Oh, so you're still working in retail, right?" I nodded, unwilling to elaborate further. What she didn't know, and what I didn't care to explain that night, was that my retail job was actually running my own luxury design boutique. But I didn't feel the need to prove myself. Not yet. After dinner, I brought out dessert, and Tiffany took only a tiny bite before setting her fork down. "It's good," she said flatly. "But I don't really eat sugar. I'm trying to stay wedding ready. You know?" Daniel laughed, oblivious as ever, and I smiled tightly, nodding. I could tell that Tiffany wasn't just trying to make conversation, she was testing me. When they finally left, Daniel hugged me tightly and thanked me for the lovely evening. Tiffany gave a polite nod and said, "It was quaint. Good night, ma'am." I closed the door behind them, leaning against it for a long moment. My home, once warm and peaceful, suddenly felt cold and heavy with unease. I walked into the kitchen, staring at the half-eaten pie and the untouched plate she'd left behind. A deep sigh escaped me as I whispered to myself, "Quaint, huh?" That word replayed in my mind over and over as I cleaned up the dishes. I wasn't angry, not yet. But something inside me told me Tiffany wasn't just being rude, she was making a statement. She didn't see me as family, she saw me as someone to outshine, to belittle. And while I wasn't sure why, one thing was already clear. This wasn't going to be an easy relationship. By the end of the evening, I already sensed Tiffany didn't just dislike me, she saw me as competition. I tried to brush it off, telling myself she was just nervous, but Tiffany made it her mission to remind me I didn't belong. After that dinner, I gave Tiffany the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she had been anxious, maybe the tension I felt wasn't real. I wanted to believe that, for Daniel's sake. He was so happy with her, glowing in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. I told myself not to overthink it, that maybe I was just being too sensitive. But as the weeks went on, the cracks widened. Daniel started bringing Tiffany over more often, insisting we spend time together so we could bond as a family. I smiled and agreed every time, but inside, I felt a pit growing in my stomach. I tried to make each visit comfortable, fresh flowers on the table, warm meals, and my best attempt at conversation. But Tiffany had other plans. The first time she came over again, she walked through the door, scanned my living room, and said, "Oh, this place is so cozy, like something out of an old magazine." She smiled, but the tone wasn't admiration, it was dismissal. Then she added, "You must be sentimental. I love how you've kept everything so vintage." I looked around at my carefully decorated home, framed photos, soft earth tones, the same curtains Daniel helped me hang years ago. Her words weren't a compliment. They were a judgment. At dinner that night, when I complimented her dress, she smiled and said, "Thanks. I actually thrifted it. I figured it'd make a good impression." You know, something classic. Since you like that sort of thing. I forced a polite laugh. "That's lovely, dear." Daniel, he laughed easily with both of us, thinking everything was fine. But Tiffany kept making these subtle remarks, little digs dressed as innocent comments. When I mentioned that I'd been working late the night before, she asked, "Still at the shop?" and smiled sweetly. "It must be exhausting doing that kind of work at your age." I wanted to say something to remind her that I wasn't some tired clerk stacking shelves, but I bit my tongue. It wasn't worth upsetting Daniel. I kept quiet, until the third visit. That night, Tiffany brought dessert from a high-end bakery. "I thought I'd give you a break from all the homemade stuff," she said, her tone light, but her eyes sharp. "I know how tiring it must be to always cook." I smiled, even though I could feel the heat rising in my chest. "That's very thoughtful of you, Tiffany." "Thank you." She looked smug, like she'd scored some kind of victory. Later that evening, when Daniel stepped out to take a call, Tiffany leaned closer to me and said softly, "I hope you don't take offense, Helena. I just think it's time Daniel experiences something different. You know, a more modern kind of woman in his life." I froze, stunned by her audacity. "I beg your pardon?" I asked quietly. She smiled, that same polished, unshakable smile. "Oh, I just mean you've done so much for him already. Now he can move forward. With me." I stared at her for a moment, realizing she wasn't just being disrespectful, she was territorial. She didn't want to be part of Daniel's family. She wanted to replace it. When Daniel came back into the room, she instantly switched back into her sugary voice, wrapping her arm around him and laughing. I excused myself to the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter to steady my hands. That night, I confided in my best friend, Lydia. We'd known each other since college, and she'd always been my voice of reason. Over coffee, I told her everything, the subtle insults, the digs, the way Tiffany looked at me like I was something to be scrubbed out of Daniel's life. Lydia didn't even hesitate. Helena, that woman's not being catty. She's being strategic. She's testing how much she can get away with. Her words made my stomach twist. But Daniel doesn't see it, I said helplessly. He thinks she's perfect. He's in love, Lydia said softly. He can't see through the charm yet. But you can. After that, I started noticing even more signs. Every time Tiffany posted on social media after visiting, there was always a little jab hidden in her captions, a selfie at my house with a line like, "Playing house with the in-laws." Or, "Some people live in the past, but I guess that's what makes them sweet." Her followers would comment things like, "Aw, you're so patient with older people, and you'll modernize them soon enough." It was humiliating. And what hurt most was knowing that she'd deliberately turned my hospitality into a joke for the world to see. I started pulling back emotionally, keeping my responses polite but brief whenever she came around. I knew she noticed her smiles became tighter, her tone more cutting, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose my composure. Daniel remained blissfully unaware, still lost in his love-struck haze. Every time he looked at Tiffany, his eyes shone with the same trust and affection he once had when he was a child looking at me. It was that very innocence I was trying to protect. Because while Tiffany thought she was playing a clever little game, she didn't realize she was slowly revealing exactly who she really was. I decide to keep quiet for now, but I promise myself I'll uncover why she's really acting this way. A week later, Tiffany invited me to her bridal shower, claiming she wanted to start over. I should have known better. It was a Thursday afternoon when I got the message. I was finishing up paperwork in my office when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Tiffany. "Hi Helena, I'd love for you to come to my bridal shower next weekend. I want us to start over on a better note." I stared at the screen for a long time. Her sudden politeness felt off. Too rehearsed. But Daniel had been talking non-stop about the upcoming event, saying how much it meant to Tiffany that I was included. So, I swallowed my hesitation and decided to go. After all, maybe this was her way of extending an olive branch. That evening, I called Lydia. "Do you think I should go?" I asked. "Go," she said firmly. "But keep your eyes open. If she really wants peace, you'll see it in her actions. If not, well, you'll know what she's up to." I took her advice. I even went shopping for a small gift, a delicate crystal vase engraved with Tiffany and Daniel's initials. It was elegant and thoughtful, nothing extravagant. I told myself that maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment we turned a corner. The following Saturday, I arrived at the venue, an upscale rooftop lounge in the heart of the city. The kind of place where every chair was upholstered in velvet and the champagne flowed endlessly. The moment I stepped through the glass doors, I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me. Tiffany spotted me first. She looked absolutely flawless in a pastel pink dress, surrounded by a group of glamorous women. Her smile widened as she waved. "Helena, you made it!" Her tone was syrupy sweet, but there was something sharp in her eyes, that same glint I'd seen at dinner weeks earlier. "Of course," I replied, handing her the gift. "Thank you for inviting me." She looked at the vase, then flashed a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, how traditional." "That's so you." Her friends chuckled quietly. I pretended not to notice. As I walked further in, I realized the atmosphere wasn't what I expected. The guests weren't close family or old friends, they were Tiffany's colleagues, influencers, and people who seemed more interested in posting photos than celebrating love. Every corner had a selfie ring light, every table was covered in luxury brand gift bags. Tiffany introduced me to the group with a theatrical smile. "Everyone, this is Daniel's mom, Helena. She's so sweet. Still works in retail and everything. Isn't that adorable?" The words hit like a slap. The women smiled politely, but I caught the flicker of judgment in their eyes. Retail. Adorable. She'd said it to belittle me, not to honor me. I forced a pleasant smile and replied, "Yes, I do. I believe in staying grounded, no matter how much success life brings." Her expression faltered for half a second before she recovered. "Oh, absolutely. Humility is so important," she said, with that same sugary tone. Throughout the event, She kept dropping those little remarks, each one disguised as a joke. When I mentioned how beautiful the decorations were, she laughed and said, "I wanted it to feel a bit more modern, you know. Something you probably don't get to see often." Her friends giggled. I sipped my champagne and kept my composure, but inside, my patience was thinning. At one point, Tiffany began telling a story about her engagement ring. "Daniel proposed at the most exclusive restaurant," she said proudly. "I think he wanted to make sure it wasn't like a home-cooked dinner situation or anything." Everyone laughed except me. My heart sank because I realized that was a direct jab at me. Daniel's father had proposed to me during dinner at home, over my favorite pasta. She didn't just want to embarrass me. She wanted to erase me from Daniel's story. A few women at my table exchanged uneasy glances, clearly realizing what Tiffany was doing. One of them, a kind-looking brunette, leaned toward me and whispered, "Don't take it personally. Tiffany can be intense when she's trying to impress people." I smiled faintly. "I can see that." By the end of the evening, the laughter felt forced, and I was counting the minutes until I could leave. As the guests began to depart, Tiffany approached me again, her voice honeyed and false. "Thank you so much for coming, Helena," she said. "I really hope today helped you feel included. I know it can be hard when families change." I met her gaze steadily. "Families don't change." When I finally stepped outside into the cool night air, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My hands were trembling slightly as I unlocked my car. I sat there for a moment, staring at the glittering city lights, trying to process everything. I had come hoping for peace, but what I'd found was something else entirely: manipulation wrapped in charm, cruelty hidden behind couture. As I drove home, the words she'd said echoed in my mind like a haunting melody. "Still works in retail, traditional, included." She wasn't trying to build a bridge between us. She was trying to humiliate me in front of everyone who mattered to her. That realization hit me like ice water, washing away any trace of denial I had left. That night, I realized Tiffany didn't invite me to reconcile, she invited me to humiliate me. It wasn't just her words anymore, she had turned her friends into a weapon. After that bridal shower, I tried to let it go. I told myself it was one event, one bad night, one moment of poor judgment. But something deep inside me kept whispering that it wasn't over. And I was right. Tiffany had gotten what she wanted that night. She had set the tone. From then on, every interaction was her stage. And she played her part with precision. She knew exactly how to make me look small without ever raising her voice. A few days later, she invited me to another gathering, a casual girls' brunch with her bridesmaids. She said she wanted me to get to know her friends better before the wedding. I hesitated, but Daniel was so happy when I agreed that I couldn't bring myself to decline. When I arrived at the cafe, the laughter hit me before I even stepped inside. Tiffany sat at the center of the table, surrounded by her perfectly styled friends. They were all in their late 20s, dressed in pastel tones, with matching manicures and glossy hair that shimmered in the morning light. I suddenly felt like I'd stepped into a world I didn't belong in. "Helena," Tiffany said cheerfully, waving me over. "We were just talking about you." I forced a smile and took a seat. The conversation immediately shifted, I could feel it. It wasn't about including me, it was about showcasing me. One of her friends, a tall brunette with diamond earrings, leaned forward and said, "So Helena, I heard you raised Daniel alone? That's impressive." "Thank you," I said warmly. "It wasn't always easy, but he's a wonderful man." Before I could finish, Tiffany chimed in. "Yes, she's very proud. She always reminds us that she did it without any help." The way she said it made it sound like arrogance, not love. A few of the women giggled softly. Another friend, a petite blonde, asked, "So, what do you do for work, Helena?" I opened my mouth to answer. But Tiffany cut in again. She runs a little shop. Isn't that cute? I keep telling her she should take a break. Retirement is supposed to be fun. They laughed politely, not realizing she'd just turned my career into a punchline. I sipped my coffee, my pulse pounding. Actually, I said calmly, my work keeps me quite fulfilled. I enjoy it. Oh, of course, Tiffany said quickly, feigning innocence. I didn't mean it like that. It's just, Daniel's used to a certain lifestyle now, so I'm sure that kind of work must feel different for you. Her friends nodded in unison, their smiles thin and knowing. It was subtle, painfully so. Each word, each glance, was designed to make me feel out of place. After brunch, as we all stood up to leave, I overheard whispers behind me. She's sweet, but she's definitely old school. I can't imagine having her as a mother-in-law. Can you believe she still works? My mom retired ages ago. I clenched my purse tighter, pretending not to hear. Tiffany walked beside me, her voice low and saccharine. You did great today, she said. They loved you. You just have such classic energy. Classic, another word she weaponized. That night, I sat alone at my dining table, staring at the untouched leftovers from dinner. Lydia called, as if sensing I needed her. How was the brunch? She asked cautiously. I hesitated before answering. It was like being in a room full of perfume and poison. Lydia sighed heavily. She's doing it on purpose, Helena. She wants to make you look small in front of others so Daniel won't notice how cruel she is in private. I swallowed hard. But why? What did I ever do to her? Nothing, Lydia said. But women like that don't need a reason. Your presence alone threatens the image she's trying to create. Her words echoed in my mind for days. And then, I found proof that Lydia was right. At work the following week, one of my assistants showed me something she'd found online. Tiffany had posted photos from her bridal shower and brunch, every image carefully curated. But it wasn't the photos that hurt. It was the captions. One under a picture of her with her friends read, "Brunch with my girls. Learning patience with the older generation, it's a journey." Another photo from the bridal shower said, "Some traditions are better left in the past." The comments underneath were filled with laughing emojis and supportive messages like, "You're handling it so well, Queen." I felt my chest tighten. She wasn't just mocking me privately, she was building an audience for it. She was painting me as some outdated, overbearing mother-in-law before I'd even done anything wrong. When Daniel came over for dinner that weekend, I tried to bring it up gently. "Sweetheart," I said, "does Tiffany ever post things about me online?" He frowned. "What?" "No, of course not. She adores you." I forced a smile, deciding not to push further. He was blind in love, and I wasn't going to be the one to break his heart, not yet. After he left, I sat in silence for a long time. I'd endured her arrogance, her whispers, her lies, but the humiliation was no longer private. She had turned it into a performance. But as I leave that evening, something inside me hardens. I decide I won't stay silent anymore. Revenge wasn't my goal, but the truth always finds its way out. After that brunch, something inside me changed. For weeks I'd tried to take the high road. I'd smiled through Tiffany's barbed comments, laughed off her thinly veiled insults, and swallowed my pride in the name of family harmony. But that day, as I scrolled through her smug social media posts, her perfectly staged photos, her mocking captions, I realized something important. She wasn't just trying to embarrass me, she was trying to erase me. And I wasn't going to let her. I didn't want to humiliate her or ruin her relationship with Daniel, but I needed to understand why she was doing this. What kind of person goes to such lengths to belittle someone who's done nothing but show kindness? The answer, I suspected, was hidden somewhere in her past. That night, I called Lydia. She was quiet as I spoke, then said exactly what I was already thinking. "If you want to protect Daniel, you need to know who you're dealing with." I hesitated. "You think I should look into her?" "Helena," she said gently, "you're not snooping. You're safeguarding your son's future. There's a difference." She was right. So I started small. I began by searching Tiffany's name online. What I found was Odd. Her LinkedIn said she worked in luxury marketing, but there was no trace of her company anywhere. Her work history seemed stitched together, full of vague titles and missing dates. Her Instagram was public, but there was an almost unnatural level of polish to it, every photo filtered, every caption calculated. Then, I noticed something strange. A few years back, her posts abruptly stopped for several months. When she returned, she looked slightly different. Different hairstyle, different city, even a different last name. That was the first red flag. I mentioned it to Lydia, and she immediately offered to help. She had a few friends in corporate HR, and within a few days, she'd found something concrete. Tiffany hadn't just left her old job, she'd been fired. The reason? Fraud. Apparently, she'd manipulated expense reports and used company funds for personal purchases. She'd been quietly dismissed to avoid public scandal, and shortly after that, she'd moved cities and started using her mother's maiden name. My heart sank as I read the email Lydia forwarded me, complete with documentation and dates. Daniel had no idea. He believed Tiffany was an ambitious professional with a promising career. But in reality, she was living off credit cards and appearances. I sat alone in my living room that night, staring at the evidence spread out on my coffee table. The pieces of Tiffany's puzzle were finally falling into place. No wonder she had been so desperate to control the narrative, to present herself as refined and successful. She was terrified of being exposed. And I, without even trying, had become the threat. I spent the next few days thinking about what to do. Confronting her directly would only lead to denial and drama. Telling Daniel without proof would risk him thinking I was just jealous or meddling. I needed to be smart. I decided to quietly gather more. Lydia helped me pull public records, addresses, employment details, even a few old articles. One particularly revealing piece was an archived business blog post where Tiffany, under her old name, bragged about networking her way into luxury events. The comments under that post were brutal. Several former colleagues accused her of deceit and manipulation. Reading their words sent a chill down my spine. Every description of her behavior, charming in public, cruel in private, obsessed with image, was exactly what I'd been experiencing. By the end of that week, I had a full folder's worth of information. Documents, screenshots, and statements, all painting a very different picture of the woman my son was about to marry. Still, I wasn't ready to use it. Not yet. I needed the right time, the right place. A moment where truth would speak louder than anger. And that moment was closer than I thought. One evening, Daniel came over for dinner, his usual bright smile dimmed. He seemed distracted. I asked if everything was all right. He sighed. Tiffany's been really stressed about the engagement party. She feels like you don't like her. My chest tightened. Daniel, I've tried. I know, Mom, he said quickly, raising his hands. I know you've been kind. She feels like you judge her. She wants everything to be perfect. Perfect. The word made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. I'll be there, I said softly. I'll behave. You have my word. He smiled with relief and hugged me. Thank you. She'll see how amazing you are once she gets to know you. I smiled back. But inside, something dark flickered. Tiffany didn't need to get to know me. She needed to face who she really was. Over the next week, I tucked the folder neatly into my desk drawer, labeled it simply T. Every night before bed, I looked at it, debating whether I was doing the right thing. I wasn't driven by hatred, just a deep ache to protect my son from heartbreak and manipulation. Then, the invitation arrived. The engagement party of Tiffany and Daniel, elegant fonts, gold trim, and a venue that cost more than most people's yearly salary. The irony was almost poetic. The woman who had spent months mocking my so-called retail life was about to hold the event of her dreams, and she had no idea she'd invited her own undoing. I picked up the invitation and stared at it, my reflection faintly visible in the glossy paper. I won't embarrass you, Daniel, I whispered. But she's not walking into our family on a lie. I knew that party would be my stage, not for revenge, but for the truth. The night Tiffany tried to destroy me was the night she unknowingly destroyed herself. The evening of the engagement party arrived faster than I expected. The invitation had promised an unforgettable night, and something inside me told me it would be, though not for the reasons Tiffany imagined. I stood before my mirror, staring at my reflection. I'd chosen a simple, floor-length navy gown, elegant but understated. A string of pearls around my neck, my late husband's gift on our 10th anniversary. I wanted to look graceful, dignified, but not like I was competing. Tiffany had made that mistake from day one, turning every moment into a contest. Tonight, I would let her believe she'd already won. As I arrived at the grand banquet hall, soft music floated through the air. The chandeliers glowed golden, reflecting off champagne flutes and diamond jewelry. It was the kind of venue meant to impress, and clearly, that was Tiffany's goal. Every detail screamed extravagance: designer centerpieces, crystal place cards, and a custom dessert bar with their initials carved in ice. Daniel spotted me first, smiling widely as he hurried over. "Mom, you look beautiful." I hugged him tightly, my heart swelling. "You do too, sweetheart." Then Tiffany appeared, gliding toward us in a sparkling silver gown that caught the light like liquid metal. Her makeup was flawless, her hair sculpted into perfect waves. She looked like she belonged on a red carpet, and she knew it. "Helena?" she said, her smile dazzling and sharp. "I'm so glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied. "Oh, good," she said, lowering her voice just enough for only me to hear. "Try not to feel too out of place tonight. There's a lot of important people here." I met her gaze steadily. "I'll do my best." For a split second, she seemed thrown off by my calmness. But she quickly recovered, linking arms with Daniel as photographers circled them. I stepped aside, watching, as she posed gracefully, playing the part of the perfect fiancée. The night unfolded in a blur of polite conversations and shallow laughter. Tiffany floated from table to table, charming everyone effortlessly, or so it seemed. Every now and then, she'd make little remarks that made my stomach twist. When a guest complimented my dress, Tiffany laughed lightly and said, "Oh yes, Helena's always been such a fan of classic looks. It's her signature." When someone asked how I knew Daniel's father, she interrupted. "He passed away years ago. She's been independent ever since. I guess that's why she's so traditional." Her words dripped with fake sympathy, masking mockery. And the worst part? People nodded along, oblivious to the cruelty beneath her tone. Still, I stayed quiet. I smiled. I let her talk, because I knew something she didn't. As dinner was served, Daniel made a heartfelt speech thanking everyone for coming. His voice trembled with emotion as he spoke about love, commitment, and family. Then Tiffany took the microphone, thanking her bridesmaids, her parents, and Daniel. Finally, she looked at me. "And of course," she said sweetly, "I want to thank my future mother-in-law for coming tonight. I know how hard it must be adjusting to all this change, but we're one family now, right?" The crowd chuckled lightly, thinking it was harmless banter. I felt every eye turn toward me. Tiffany stood there, radiant and smug, basking in the moment she thought she'd humiliated me. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "Oh, Helena, why don't you say a few words too? We'd love to hear from you." Daniel looked at me expectantly, his face warm with pride. "Please, Mom," he said softly. "It would mean a lot." I could see it in Tiffany's expression. This was her trap. She expected me to stumble, to get emotional, maybe even to embarrass myself in front of her glittering audience. I rose slowly from my seat, smoothing the front of my dress. "Of course," I said. "I'd be honored." As I walked to the stage, my heart beat calmly. Not with fear, but with clarity. I took the microphone, smiled at the guests, and began. "Good evening, everyone," I said. "First of all, thank you for being here to celebrate my son and the woman he loves. It means more to me than you can imagine." The room grew quiet. Tiffany's smirk lingered, but her confidence began to flicker. I've watched Daniel grow from a curious little boy into the remarkable man standing here today. He's kind, loyal, and honest, qualities I've always admired. And I've always told him that the person he chooses to share his life with should reflect those same values. I glanced at Tiffany briefly before continuing. When Daniel's father passed away, I made him a promise that I would give our son every chance at happiness, no matter the cost. I worked hard, sometimes too hard, to build a life for us. Some of you may know that I started from nothing, but what you may not know is that I built something lasting. There was a soft murmur among the guests. Tiffany's smile faltered slightly. I've been blessed, I said gently, to turn my love of design into a business, a company that's allowed me to give back, to create, and to meet wonderful people. Some of you might even recognize the name, Carter Luxe Designs. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Tiffany blinked, her eyes widening. Several guests exchanged glances, clearly familiar with the name. Carter Luxe was a respected luxury fashion label, one often featured in high-end magazines and events. I continued smoothly. Tonight's floral arrangements and decor were generously provided by my company, a small token of love for my son's big day. The audience burst into polite applause. But Tiffany? She stood frozen, her perfect smile cracking. I looked directly at her, my voice calm but steady. Tiffany, you've done an extraordinary job planning this evening. I admire your confidence. And I hope, from this day forward, we can truly begin to understand one another honestly. Her face flushed crimson. She forced a tight smile, but the glint of triumph in her eyes had vanished. I ended the speech with a final toast to love and family. The crowd clapped warmly, but all I could see was Tiffany standing still, speechless. Her facade starting to crumble under the weight of the truth. When I start speaking, I can feel Tiffany smirking until I change the tone completely. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge is truth told at the right time. As I stood there, the soft applause echoing around the hall, I could feel the shift in the air. Moments before, Tiffany had been glowing with confidence, soaking up every compliment and laugh. Now, her smile looked plastered on, her knuckles white as she clutched her champagne glass. I didn't need to raise my voice or speak with anger, the truth itself had begun its quiet work. I took a small sip of water, then continued speaking into the microphone, my tone warm but firm. I don't often talk about my past, I said. But tonight feels like a good time to share something personal. When Daniel's father passed away, I was lost. I didn't know how I'd keep our home, or even how to pay for Daniel's school. But I did what every mother does, I adapted. The crowd listened intently. A few people nodded. I noticed Tiffany's mother watching me closely, her expression unreadable. I started Carter Luxe Designs in my kitchen, I went on. At first, it was just me and a sewing machine. I made one dress, then another, and before I knew it, I was selling to boutiques. 20 years later, our designs have been worn by women all over the country. It's been a long road, and I'm proud of it. There was a ripple of surprise and admiration through the guests. Someone even whispered, "She owns Carter Luxe?" As though I had just revealed I was royalty. Tiffany, however, looked like she'd swallowed glass. Her eyes darted from one face to another, realizing that her entire audience now saw me differently, not as the sweet, outdated mom she'd painted, but as a successful, respected woman. I smiled gently and looked over at Daniel. His face was a mixture of shock and pride. "Daniel's been my greatest success," I said softly. "He's everything his father and I dreamed he'd become. And tonight, I want to thank Tiffany for making him so happy." Tiffany blinked rapidly, her lips parting as if she wasn't sure whether to smile or glare. Thank you, Helena," she stammered. "Oh, please," I said with a calm chuckle. "Call me Helena, we're family now." The audience laughed warmly, but beneath the lightness, something far more powerful was happening. Tiffany's carefully crafted image was crumbling, piece by piece. After I stepped down from the stage, several guests came up to shake my hand. "I had no idea you were that Helena Carter," one woman said. "Your designs are exquisite." "Thank you," I said with a modest smile. "I try to keep my work separate from my personal life." Meanwhile, Tiffany stood off to the side, trying to pull herself together. I saw her whisper something to Daniel, who frowned slightly, his hand resting on her shoulder. She must have said something defensive, because I heard him murmur, "Why didn't you tell me Mom was?" Before she quickly interrupted, her voice tight with forced cheer. I didn't need to hear the rest. I already knew where this was going. When the music resumed, I found a quiet corner by the bar. Lydia would have been proud of me, I thought. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't insulted anyone. I had simply spoken truth and it had landed exactly where it needed to. But I wasn't done yet. Later that night, as the party began to wind down, Tiffany approached me. Her polite smile was gone. In its place was a hard, nervous look. "Helena," she said through clenched teeth, "that little speech of yours was unexpected." I sipped my drink, keeping my tone light. "Oh, I just thought people might like to know a bit about my journey." She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "You just had to make it about you, didn't you?" I turned to face her fully. "No, Tiffany, I made it about truth. I've been nothing but kind to you and you've repaid that with mockery and lies. I've stayed silent for Daniel's sake, but tonight? Well, I decided honesty might serve us better." Her jaw tightened. "You're twisting things. I've never lied." "Really?" I asked quietly. "Then you won't mind if Daniel and I have a chat about your previous job at Meriton Marketing? The one you were dismissed from 3 years ago for expense fraud?" Her face drained of color. "I what?" I leaned in slightly, keeping my voice low and composed. "Oh, Tiffany, you're not the only one who knows how to do her homework. You might have fooled Daniel for a while, but you can't build a marriage on deceit. Eventually, truth finds its way to the surface." For a long moment, she said nothing. Her hands trembled as she set her glass down on a nearby table. "You don't have proof," she whispered. I smiled faintly. "You'll find I do." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She looked around the room at the guests laughing and mingling, at Daniel chatting happily with his old college friends, and I could see the panic begin to rise behind her eyes. "You don't know what you're doing," she hissed. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing," I said quietly. "I'm giving you a chance to come clean before Daniel learns the truth in front of everyone." I walked away before she could respond. Every step felt lighter, steadier. The power she had stolen through manipulation had shifted back where it belonged. By the end of the night, Tiffany barely spoke. Her laughter was gone, her charm replaced by brittle silence. Daniel noticed, of course, but when he asked if she was feeling okay, she just forced a laugh and said, "Just tired." But I knew better. I could see it in her eyes, the fear, the realization that her carefully built empire of lies was beginning to collapse. And for the first time since this entire ordeal began, I felt a strange calm wash over me. The silence that follows is heavy and Tiffany's mask begins to crack. What happened next turned the entire room against her. The moment I stepped off that stage, the engagement party changed entirely. You could feel it, the tension, the whispers, the way conversations softened when Tiffany passed by. I didn't have to say another word. The truth had already started to ripple through the crowd like a quiet storm. People who had once been hanging off her every sentence were now turning their attention elsewhere. A few of the guests approached me, asking polite questions about my company, complimenting my speech, offering genuine smiles. Meanwhile, Tiffany drifted from group to group, trying desperately to reclaim control. Her laugh was forced, her posture too stiff, her charm fading fast. Daniel eventually found me near the refreshment table, his expression somewhere between awe and confusion. "Mom," he said softly, "I had no idea. Carter Lux, that's you?" I smiled, resting a hand on his arm. "It wasn't something I felt the need to bring up, sweetheart. I wanted you to love Tiffany for who she is, not for what I could offer." He nodded slowly, glancing around the room. "Everyone's talking about it. Tiffany looks upset." "She'll be fine," I said gently. "It's been a long night." He hesitated. "Did something happen between you two?" "I can tell she's been tense all evening." I took a deep breath. "Daniel," I said carefully. "I think Tiffany's been under a lot of pressure to impress everyone. Maybe she's been trying too hard. Maybe she's forgotten that sincerity matters more than appearances." He frowned, but before I could continue, Tiffany appeared beside him, her voice trembling slightly. "Daniel, can I talk to you? In private?" He nodded, glancing at me apologetically. I gave him a reassuring smile. Go ahead. They disappeared into a side hallway, and though I couldn't hear their words, I could read their body language from across the room. Tiffany's gestures were frantic, defensive. Daniel's were confused, then sharp, then still. After a few minutes, he came back alone. His face was pale. Mom, he said, his voice low. Did you tell Tiffany you were investigating her? I met his eyes steadily. No. I told her I knew the truth. He blinked, taken aback. The truth about what? I reached into my small clutch and pulled out a single folded document. I had carried it all evening, unsure whether I'd need it. My hands didn't shake as I handed it to him. You deserve to see it for yourself. Daniel unfolded the paper slowly. As he read, the color drained from his face. What is this? He whispered. Expense report fraud? Fired for misuse of funds? And her last name was different? Yes, I said quietly. She's been lying about her past. I didn't want to tell you this way, but after tonight, I couldn't keep it from you any longer. He stood there in stunned silence, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. From the corner of my eye, I saw Tiffany reappear. Her face was streaked with mascara, her expression wild and desperate. She spotted Daniel holding the document and froze. Daniel, it's not what you think, she said quickly, rushing toward him. Your mother is trying to turn you against me. She's jealous. She's always been jealous. Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. Jealous? Of what, Tiffany? Your lies? Gasps rippled through the guests nearby. Tiffany's head whipped around, realizing that several people were now watching them. You don't understand, she cried. It wasn't fraud. It was a misunderstanding. And Daniel interrupted, his tone sharper now. You told me you left that company because you wanted to pursue your passion. You lied to me about your job, your name, everything. Why? She reached for his hand, but he stepped back. Daniel, please. I just wanted you to see me differently. I didn't want my past to ruin things. I watched silently, my heart aching for my son. I hadn't wanted to humiliate her publicly, but she'd forced this confrontation by cornering herself with deception. Tiffany turned toward me then, her eyes blazing. You did this, she hissed. You couldn't just let me be happy, could you? You had to prove you were better. I met her anger with calm. No, Tiffany, I wanted you to be honest, that's all. The guests around us had grown completely silent. Every whisper, every fake laugh had died away. All that remained was the sound of Tiffany's uneven breathing and Daniel's broken heart. Finally, Daniel spoke again, his voice quiet but final. I think you should go. Her eyes widened in disbelief. What? You lied to me, he said simply, and you tried to humiliate my mother. There's no coming back from that. Tiffany's lip trembled. She looked around the room, realizing that no one was rushing to her defense. Her friends, those same women who'd once fawned over her, stood frozen, unsure what to say. I'm sorry, she whispered, but her apology fell flat. She grabbed her clutch and fled the room, the sound of her heels echoing against the marble floor. Daniel stood there for a long moment, staring after her. Then he turned to me. Mom, I didn't want to believe it, but she really fooled me. I wrapped my arms around him gently. You loved her. Daniel, that's not foolishness, that's humanity. What matters is what you do next. He nodded, his shoulders shaking slightly as he hugged me back. I'm so sorry you had to deal with all this. You have nothing to be sorry for, I whispered. You're safe now. That's what matters. As the guests slowly began to murmur again, the music resumed quietly. The night that was supposed to celebrate love had turned into an unmasking, but in truth, I didn't feel triumphant. Just relieved. In that single moment, Tiffany's entire facade comes crashing down. Once the truth was out, there was no taking it back. The engagement party that had begun with glitter, champagne, and laughter ended in cold silence. Guests avoided eye contact as Tiffany's sobs echoed faintly through the hallway where she'd fled. The music stopped completely, and even the waitstaff looked uneasy, unsure whether to keep serving or quietly retreat. The golden glow that had once filled the room now felt dim and hollow. Daniel stood beside me, his hands still trembling slightly. He didn't say much, but I could see the storm of emotions raging behind his eyes: shock, disbelief, heartbreak. I wanted to reach out, to fix it somehow, but there are some kinds of pain a mother can't protect her child from. This was one of them. We left the party early, ignoring the curious stares and whispered gossip that followed us to the door. Outside, the cool night air felt like a release. I inhaled deeply, the weight of weeks of silence finally lifting from my chest. In the car, Daniel was quiet for most of the drive. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the city lights flashing across the windshield. Then, finally, his voice broke through the stillness. "She lied to me, Mom," he said softly. "About everything. Her job, her past, even her family. She told me her parents lived abroad, but they were sitting right there tonight. They didn't even know half of what she'd told me." I sighed. "Sometimes people lie because they're afraid, Daniel. Afraid of being seen for who they really are." He shook his head. "But why humiliate you? You never did anything to her." I looked out the window, because she needed someone to stand on to feel tall. Daniel fell silent again, and I could see the sadness on his face. He wasn't angry, not yet. Just hurt, deeply hurt. When we got home, he collapsed onto the couch and buried his face in his hands. I sat beside him, rubbing his shoulder gently like I used to when he was a little boy who'd scraped his knee. "You'll get through this," I whispered. He looked up at me, eyes red. "You must think I'm a fool." "Never," I said firmly. "You saw what she wanted you to see. That's not foolishness, that's love. But now that the illusion's gone, you can see clearly." Over the next few days, the story spread quickly. I hadn't intended for anyone outside that room to know, but gossip has a way of traveling faster than truth. Within a week, Tiffany's name was circulating among mutual friends, and her spotless reputation was gone. She didn't take it well. She tried reaching out to Daniel: calls, texts, voicemails filled with apologies and excuses. He ignored them all. At one point, she even sent me a long message, claiming she never meant to hurt anyone and that she just wanted to be accepted. I read it once and deleted it. Her version of acceptance had always meant dominance. Daniel spent a few days staying with me, just trying to process everything. He barely ate, barely slept. One night, I heard him in the kitchen, pacing. When I walked in, he turned to me, his face tired but calm. "I called off the engagement," he said quietly. "It's over." I nodded, my heart heavy but relieved. "I know it wasn't easy." He gave a small, bitter laugh. "She didn't even fight it. She just said, 'I figured as much.' Like it didn't even matter." I reached out and took his hand. "It matters, Daniel. You may not see it now, but it does. It means you're free to start again, this time with honesty." In the days that followed, things began to settle. The noise of the scandal faded, replaced by an uneasy calm. I went back to work, pouring my focus into designing new pieces for the upcoming season. Creating always healed me. Stitch by stitch, color by color, I found my peace again. Daniel, too, began to heal. He went back to the gym, spent more time with his friends, even joined me for lunch at the boutique once a week. The smile that had disappeared slowly began to return. One afternoon, as we sat together sipping coffee, he said quietly, "You know, I keep thinking about that night. About how calm you were. How you never once tried to humiliate her." I smiled faintly. "Humiliation never teaches anyone anything, Daniel. But truth? Truth has its own way of settling scores." He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. The following week, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. The handwriting was elegant, almost delicate. It was from Tiffany's mother. "Dear Helena," it began, "I wanted to apologize personally for my daughter's actions. We were unaware of many things she'd done. Thank you for handling the situation with dignity. You spared her worse humiliation by keeping so much of what you knew private. I wish her father and I had raised her with half the grace you've shown. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into a drawer. There was no satisfaction in reading it, only a quiet sense of closure. That weekend, Daniel came to me again. He looked lighter somehow, as though a weight had been lifted. "I think I'm ready to move on," he said. "No more bitterness. Just lessons learned." I smiled and kissed his forehead. That's my boy. That night, I stood by my bedroom window, watching the moonlight spill across the quiet street. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Not triumph, not vindication, just peace. The kind that comes when you finally let the truth breathe on its own. I feel both relief and sorrow. It wasn't victory I wanted, but peace. The weeks after were filled with both healing and guilt. After the engagement party fiasco, life didn't return to normal overnight. The silence that followed was deafening, like the aftermath of a storm when the air still smells like rain and everything feels a little too still. Daniel stayed with me for almost 2 weeks, mostly quiet, processing everything in his own way. I didn't push him to talk. Sometimes, silence is the only medicine for heartbreak. He spent long hours sitting on the porch, staring into space, his untouched coffee growing cold beside him. I'd bring him breakfast, leave it there without saying a word, and quietly go back inside. I could see he wasn't ready for conversation, and I respected that. Heartbreak has its own timetable. One evening, I joined him outside, wrapped in my shawl. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves. "You know," I said softly, "pain doesn't vanish just because you know the truth. It fades slowly, but it does fade." Daniel nodded. "I just feel stupid," he murmured. "I keep replaying things in my head, little red flags I ignored because I didn't want to believe them." "That's not stupidity," I said. "That's love. We all see what we hope for, not what's in front of us." He sighed deeply, resting his elbows on his knees. "You were right about her." I shook my head. "I wasn't trying to be right, Daniel. I just wanted you to be safe." That conversation marked the beginning of his healing. Slowly, he began to rejoin the world again. He went back to work, spent time with friends, and even started going to the gym again. I could see pieces of his old self returning, one smile at a time. As for me, I buried myself in work. My boutique was expanding faster than I'd anticipated, and it became both a distraction and a source of strength. My team, most of them, women, had heard whispers about what happened, and one morning, my assistant gently said, "You know, Helena, the way you handled that situation, it gave all of us something to look up to." Her words caught me off guard. I wasn't used to being seen as an example of composure. I hadn't acted out of courage, I'd acted out of love and necessity. But perhaps that's what strength truly is, doing what must be done, no matter how painful. Still, late at night, guilt crept in. Not for what I did, but for how it unfolded. I never intended to publicly expose Tiffany, and even though she brought it upon herself, part of me still felt sorry for her. I thought about her mother's letter often. I wondered what kind of fear drives someone to construct a life out of lies. Maybe it was insecurity. Maybe desperation. Or maybe she had simply never been taught the value of truth. One afternoon, while reorganizing the studio, Lydia dropped by with 2 coffees and her usual no-nonsense energy. "You look lighter," she said, handing me a cup. "Maybe I am," I admitted. "But it's complicated. I don't feel vindicated. Just tired." Lydia chuckled. "That's what happens when you fight a battle with grace instead of vengeance. You win quietly, but it still costs you energy." I smiled. "You always know what to say." She leaned against the counter, sipping her drink. "And Daniel? How's he holding up?" "Better," I said. "He's getting there. It'll take time." "That's good. He'll come out stronger." We stood in silence for a moment, watching customers browse through the latest collection. Then Lydia added, "You know, you should be proud of yourself. You didn't just save Daniel, you reminded everyone what dignity looks like." Her words stayed with me long after she left. Over the next month, Daniel began to smile again. He even joked a little. One day, as we were having lunch, he grinned and said, "I think you're right, Mom. Time really does fix everything." I laughed softly. "It doesn't fix everything, darling. It just gives you perspective." He nodded, then added, "I don't think I'll ever understand why Tiffany did all that, but I don't hate her anymore. I just don't care." And that's when I knew he was healing for real. Hate means you're still holding on. Indifference means you've finally let go. Meanwhile, I started doing something I hadn't done in years, teaching design workshops to young women. It began as a small idea, mentoring aspiring fashion students who couldn't afford formal training. But soon, it turned into something bigger. Every weekend, I'd gather a group in the studio, teaching them not just design, but resilience, how to rise above doubt, competition, and cruelty. I think, in a way, I was teaching them the very lessons I'd just learned. Of course, Tiffany didn't disappear entirely. Occasionally, I'd hear from acquaintances that she was still active on social media, sometimes posting cryptic quotes about betrayal or toxic people. I ignored it. Let her vent however she needed to. I had no interest in living inside her storm anymore. One evening, Daniel joined me for dinner. We cooked together something we hadn't done in months. The laughter came easily this time. For the first time since the party, the house felt warm again. As we sat down to eat, Daniel lifted his glass of wine. "To new beginnings," he said with a soft smile. I raised mine. "To truth and to peace." We clinked glasses, and I felt a deep sense of closure settle inside me. It wasn't the kind that comes from revenge or vindication, but the quiet kind, the kind that comes from surviving with your integrity intact. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Tiffany wasn't done yet. Just when I thought it was over, Tiffany tried to drag me down one last time. Months passed after the engagement party. Life began to feel normal again, or as normal as it could after all that chaos. Daniel was healing, my boutique was thriving, and the quiet had returned to my home. The wounds had scabbed over, and I truly believed that Tiffany had moved on. But peace, I've learned, often invites its own tests. It began on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was reviewing some new design sketches when my phone buzzed. It was an email with no subject line, from an address I didn't recognize. At first, I assumed it was spam, but the first sentence froze me in my chair. "Everyone thinks you're perfect, but I know what you're hiding." The message went on, accusing me of being a manipulative woman who used my company's wealth to control my son's life. It threatened to expose me unless I stopped interfering with Daniel's happiness. It was unsigned, but I didn't need a name to know who had sent it. The tone, the bitterness, it was unmistakable. Tiffany. For a moment, my hands trembled. Then I exhaled slowly and reread it. Not out of fear, but disappointment. I had hoped she'd moved on. I had even felt pity for her. But this? This was pure spite. I immediately forwarded the email to my legal team. "Handle this discreetly," I wrote, "and find out where it came from." My lawyer, Evelyn, a sharp, composed woman who'd helped me through past business disputes, called me within the hour. "It won't take long," she said. Anonymous threats always leave footprints. True to her word, 2 days later, I had an answer. The email had been sent from an account created using Tiffany's phone number. I sat in silence for a long time after reading Evelyn's report. It wasn't shock, I felt it was sadness. There was something pathetic about how far Tiffany was willing to fall just to feel in control again. Daniel was at work that day, and I debated whether to tell him. He had come so far, and I didn't want to reopen old wounds. But I also couldn't risk Tiffany trying something worse. That evening, I made him tea and handed him my phone. "There's something you should see," I said quietly. He frowned, reading the email. When he finished, he looked at me with disbelief. "She sent this?" I nodded. "We traced it." He rubbed his forehead. "Unbelievable. After everything, she still can't let go." "I'm going to have my lawyer send a cease and desist," I said. "It's not about revenge, Daniel. It's about boundaries." He nodded firmly. "Do it. She needs to understand she can't keep doing this." Evelyn drafted the letter that same evening, professional, concise, and powerful. It stated clearly that any further defamation, threats, or harassment would result in legal action. We sent it directly to Tiffany's home address. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Tiffany. For a few seconds, I considered ignoring it, but something told me I needed to hear her one last time to close this chapter completely. I answered. "Hello, Tiffany." There was a pause, then her voice, trembling but defiant. "I got your lawyer's letter." "You didn't have to do that." "I did," I said calmly. "You crossed a line," she laughed bitterly. "You think you're so composed, don't you? Everyone sees you as this graceful saint, but you're just like everyone else. You wanted to ruin me." "I never wanted to ruin you," I said quietly. "You did that yourself." She fell silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her tone was small, almost broken. "I just wanted him back." My heart softened, just slightly. "Tiffany," I said. "You can't build love by destroying everything around it. That's not love, that's fear. You need help, not another fight." Her breathing was shaky. "You think you're better than me?" "No," I said. "But I think I learned my lessons earlier than you did." There was another long pause. Then, softly, she whispered, "Goodbye, Helena," and hung up. That was the last time I ever heard her voice. A few weeks later, Evelyn informed me that Tiffany had responded through her own attorney, agreeing to cease all contact and delete any remaining posts or emails mentioning me or Daniel. She wanted no further conflict. I agreed. I didn't want one either. When I told Daniel, he sighed in relief. "I'm glad it's over," he said. "So am I replied. "For both our sakes." We sat together that night, quietly watching a movie. Every so often, I caught him glancing at me with a look I couldn't quite describe, a mix of gratitude and regret. "Finally," he said softly. "I don't know how you stayed so calm through all this." I smiled faintly. "Because anger gives people like Tiffany power. The best revenge is living well and letting them see you do it." He chuckled quietly, and for the first time in months, his laughter sounded real again. The next morning, I opened my email and found something unexpected. A message from one of Tiffany's bridesmaids, Lauren, the same brunette who had whispered kindness to me at the bridal shower months ago. She wrote, "I just wanted to say you handled everything with grace. Tiffany's been spiraling since the truth came out, but maybe this will be what finally forces her to face herself. Thank you for protecting Daniel. He deserves peace." I read that message 3 times, tears welling in my eyes. For the first time in a long while, I felt like the storm had truly passed. I closed my laptop, looked out at the morning light streaming through the window, and whispered to myself, "It's finally over." Her final attempt to ruin me became the final confirmation of her true nature. When one chapter closes, another opens brighter than ever. Months passed, and little by little, the sharp edges of the past softened into distant memories. The tension that had once hung over my life like a storm cloud finally lifted. There were no more hateful messages, no more whispers, no more dread waiting for the next cruel twist. It was just peace. The kind of peace that feels unfamiliar at first, like sunlight after a long winter. Daniel began to truly heal. His laughter returned, not the forced, polite laughter he used to hide his pain, but the real kind that came from somewhere deep inside him. He threw himself into work, started jogging again, and even began volunteering at a local community center on weekends. Watching him rebuild himself, step by step, filled me with quiet pride. And then, one afternoon, he told me something that made my heart swell. "Mom," he said, walking into my office with a shy smile, "there's someone I'd like you to meet." For a moment, my heart skipped a beat. I wasn't afraid this time. Just cautious. I'd learned to trust Daniel's instincts again, but still. After everything that happened, I wanted to be sure. He laughed softly. "Don't worry. She's nothing like Tiffany. Her name was Emily. The first time I met her, I understood what Daniel meant. Emily was the kind of woman whose warmth filled a room without trying. She was kind, grounded, and refreshingly genuine. Her eyes lit up when Daniel spoke, and when she talked about her work as a nurse, There was a calm sincerity in her voice that reminded me of myself when I was her age. After dinner that night, as we were clearing the table, she turned to me and said, "I've heard so much about you, Helena. Daniel says you're the strongest woman he knows." I smiled. "He exaggerates." She shook her head. "I don't think he does." That simple exchange stayed with me for days. Emily didn't see me as competition or a figure to impress. She saw me as part of Daniel's story, a story she wanted to join, not rewrite. As Daniel and Emily's relationship grew, my heart began to heal too. The space that had once been filled with resentment and pain slowly became filled with gratitude. I realized that while Tiffany had tried to humiliate me, she'd actually given me something priceless, the reminder of who I truly was and the strength I had carried all along. Meanwhile, Carter Luxe Designs was flourishing more than ever. After the chaos of the engagement party, the company gained even more attention. A few journalists had picked up the story of the humble designer mother who handled humiliation with grace, and though I'd never intended to become a public example, the narrative resonated with many. Orders increased, collaborations followed, and opportunities I had never dreamed of began pouring in. But I didn't let success change the way I ran things. I used the momentum to create something meaningful, a foundation that offered training and mentorship to single mothers who wanted to learn design and entrepreneurship. I called it Luxe Lifts. The name symbolized exactly what I wanted to do: lift others the way life had eventually lifted me. The first class had only 10 women, but their enthusiasm filled the studio with light. They came from all walks of life: nurses, teachers, factory workers, each of them carrying their own story of struggle and survival. Seeing their determination reminded me of the woman I'd been 2 decades ago, sewing through the night at my kitchen table. During one of the sessions, a young mother asked me, "Helena, how do you stay so calm when people treat you badly?" I paused for a moment, thinking carefully. "Because," I said finally, "every time someone underestimates you, they hand you power. You can either waste it by getting angry or use it to build something beautiful." She smiled. And in that moment, I felt a quiet satisfaction, a kind of happiness no material success could ever match. Daniel often stopped by to help out at the foundation, sometimes bringing Emily with him. Watching them, together, easy, natural, laughing like best friends, was a kind of healing I didn't know I still needed. One evening, he called me, his voice bubbling with excitement. "Mom," he said, "I asked Emily to marry me." My eyes filled instantly. "Oh, Daniel," I whispered, "I'm so happy for you." He laughed softly. "I wanted to tell you first. I'm not rushing anything this time. We're keeping it small, simple, just us and the people who matter." That phrase, "the people who matter," hit me deeply. After everything, he'd finally learned that love isn't about showmanship or status, it's about truth. The day of their engagement dinner felt nothing like the last one. There were no photographers, no shallow compliments, no hidden barbs, just laughter, love, and gratitude. Emily's parents were warm and down to earth, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was surrounded by genuine hearts. At one point, as the evening wound down, Daniel raised his glass for a toast. "To my mother," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "For teaching me that the truth, no matter how hard, is the only foundation worth building anything on." Everyone clinked glasses, and I had to blink away the tears. Later that night, as I stood on my porch, watching the stars shimmer above the quiet street, I thought about how far we'd come. Pain had turned into wisdom. Humiliation had turned into strength. Loss had turned into love again. For the first time in years, I felt completely free from the shadows of the past. I never sought fame, but life had its own plans. After Daniel and Emily's engagement, I truly thought life had given me everything I could ask for: peace, family, and fulfillment. I didn't crave attention, nor did I ever imagine that my quiet story, the humiliation, the confrontation, the healing, would become something others would talk about. But life has a strange way of rewarding you when you least expect it. It started with a phone call from a woman named Rachel Green, the editor of a well-known lifestyle magazine. Her voice was enthusiastic and warm. "Helena, we'd love to feature you in our upcoming issue," she said. "We're running a series on women of power, women who've built their own success while facing adversity with grace. You're at the top of our list." I was taken aback. "Me?" I laughed lightly. "I think you might have the wrong person. I'm not exactly glamorous," she chuckled. "You're exactly what we're looking for. Your company's story is inspiring, but it's your composure that's caught people's attention. People are still talking about that engagement party." My heart sank slightly at the mention of it, but Rachel's tone was kind, not sensational. "Don't worry," she added quickly. "We're not interested in gossip. We want to focus on how you handled it with dignity and strength." After some hesitation, I agreed. A few weeks later, Rachel and her team arrived at my boutique for the interview. They were professional and respectful, more interested in my work than my personal life. The photographer asked me to stand in front of a wall of dresses from my latest collection, saying, "You belong here, this is your empire." The interview itself felt surprisingly therapeutic. Rachel asked thoughtful questions about motherhood, perseverance, and the balance between vulnerability and power. At one point, she asked, "Helena, what was going through your mind that night, when you chose to speak your truth instead of retaliate?" I paused, remembering Tiffany's mocking smile, the laughter, the judgment, all the moments that had tested me. "Honestly," I said softly, "I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about my son. About showing him that strength doesn't need to shout. It can whisper and still change everything." Rachel smiled, her pen stilling on her notebook. "That's beautiful," she said. "I think that's the quote we'll open the story with." A month later, the article was published. I hadn't realized just how far it would reach. Within days, my inbox flooded with messages, women from all over the country sharing their own stories. Some were mothers who had faced ridicule from their children's partners. Others were entrepreneurs who had been underestimated, mocked, or dismissed. One woman wrote, "You reminded me that silence isn't weakness, it's power under control." "Thank you for that," another said. "I was humiliated by my daughter-in-law for years. Reading your story gave me the courage to stand up for myself without losing my kindness." I read each message with tears in my eyes. I had never thought my quiet act of self-respect would ripple this far. Soon after, invitations began pouring in for speaking engagements, panel discussions, and interviews. I declined most of them, preferring to stay behind the scenes, but I did agree to one, a charity gala for women entrepreneurs. When I walked onto that stage, the applause felt surreal. I spoke about perseverance, about grace, about the fine line between strength and pride. And as I looked into the crowd faces of women nodding, smiling, tearing up, I realized something profound. What I had endured wasn't just for me. It had become a story others could draw from. Daniel sat in the front row that night, his hand clasped around Emily's. I caught his proud smile, and for a moment, it felt like the years of struggle had all led to this peace, this purpose. After the speech, he hugged me tightly. "Mom," he said quietly, "you have no idea how many lives you're touching. You think you just told a story, but you started something." I laughed softly. "I just told the truth, Daniel," he smiled. "That's exactly why people are listening." Weeks later, the magazine issue was nominated for an award. Rachel called to tell me that my segment had become their most read feature of the year. "You've inspired more women than you realize," she said. The recognition was humbling, but more than that, it was healing. The woman who had once been mocked for her simplicity was now being celebrated for her integrity. Life, it seemed, had come full circle. But one moment from that whirlwind of attention stands out clearly in my memory. During a follow-up interview, the host asked a question I wasn't expecting. She smiled gently and said, "Helena, your story is remarkable. You've built success, restored your family, and found peace. But tell me, after everything that happened, do you think you've forgiven Tiffany?" For a brief moment, I was silent. The lights above me hummed softly, I could feel every eye in the room waiting for my answer. I inhaled deeply, letting the memories wash through me, the cruelty, the humiliation, the confrontation, and finally, the silence that followed. But when the interviewer asks if I'd ever forgive Tiffany, I pause because the answer surprises even me. In the end, revenge loses meaning when you find peace. The question lingered in the air longer than I expected. "Do you think you've forgiven Tiffany?" the interviewer had asked. At first, I didn't know how to answer. Forgiveness wasn't something I'd consciously chased. I'd spent so long focusing on healing, rebuilding, and protecting Daniel that I hadn't stopped to think about whether I still held anger toward the woman who'd tried so hard to tear me down. After a long pause, I said softly, "Yes, I have." The room went completely still. The interviewer leaned forward, intrigued. "How?" she asked. "After everything she did, how do you forgive that?" I smiled faintly. "Because holding on to resentment is like keeping a wound open. It doesn't punish the person who hurt you, it only stops you from healing." The audience nodded quietly. I could see faces, softening, some even tearful. "Forgiveness," I continued, "doesn't mean excusing what happened. It means refusing to carry it anymore." When the interview ended, people came up to thank me, but I barely heard their words. My mind was somewhere else on Tiffany. For the first time in years, I didn't picture her with anger or bitterness. I pictured her as she'd been at that last party, cornered, desperate, terrified that the truth would reveal her. I wondered where she was now. Whether she had changed? Whether she had finally learned to be honest with herself. That night, back home, I sat at my desk and opened a blank sheet of stationery. I hesitated for a moment, then began to write. "Dear Tiffany, it's been a long time since we last spoke. I want you to know that I no longer carry anger toward you. I've thought about everything that happened, what you did, what I did, what it all cost, and I've realized that we were both broken people trying to protect something we valued. You wanted control because you were afraid of losing love. I wanted peace because I was afraid of losing my son. Both of us were acting from fear. I hope you've found a way to face yourself without shame. I hope you've built something honest. You once said I wanted to ruin you, but that was never true. I wanted to see you find truth because without it, love is impossible. I forgive you. Not because you asked for it, but because I need to be free. Helena." When I finished, I didn't send it. I didn't even seal it. I just folded it neatly and placed it in the same drawer where I had once kept the folder of evidence against her. One held proof of her lies. The other now held proof of my peace. Weeks later, life moved on. Carter Luxe Designs reached new heights, expanding internationally. Daniel married Emily in a small ceremony in the countryside. The day was simple, filled with laughter and sunlight, the exact opposite of the lavish, hollow spectacle that Tiffany So's had once planned. As I watched my son exchange vows, tears welled in my eyes, not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude. Emily looked radiant, Daniel glowed with happiness, and the love between them was so genuine it made my heart swell. After the ceremony, Daniel came up to me, still in his tuxedo, smiling so wide it made me laugh. "You know," he said, "you're the reason I found this. You taught me that love has to be honest." I hugged him tightly. "No, sweetheart, you learned that yourself. I just reminded you what truth looks like." During the reception, Emily stood to make a toast. Her words were simple but heartfelt. "I never met Daniel's father," she said, "but I know what kind of man he was because of the kind of woman Helena is. She raised Daniel to be strong, kind, and honest. And I can only hope to live up to the example she's set." Everyone clapped, and I felt a warmth spread through me that I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, there were no undercurrents of jealousy or tension, only love, laughter, and sincerity. Later that night, as the celebration continued, I stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The air was cool and smelled faintly of jasmine. I tilted my head toward the stars and whispered a quiet thank you to life, to fate, to whatever force had brought us through the pain to this moment. When I returned inside, Daniel and Emily were dancing, laughing as the band played their favorite song. For a fleeting moment, I saw my younger self dancing with Daniel's father all those years ago. The memory didn't bring tears anymore, just warmth. As the night wound down, guests began to leave, and Daniel came over to hug me one last time before heading off with Emily. "I love you, Mom," he said quietly. "You're my hero." I smiled, brushing a tear from his cheek. "No, Daniel, you're mine." The next morning I woke early, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat by the window watching the sun rise over the garden. The world looked softer, gentler somehow. Maybe it was just me finally seeing it that way. I thought again of Tiffany. I hadn't heard from her in nearly a year, but I no longer wondered if she'd suffered or regretted anything. I just hoped she'd found peace, too. People who cause pain usually carry their own kind of suffering. Sometimes they just hide it better. As the sunlight filled the room, I realized something profound. Forgiveness isn't a gift for the person who wronged you, it's a gift for yourself. It doesn't excuse the past, it releases its hold over you. In forgiving Tiffany, I had finally closed that chapter. My life wasn't defined by the humiliation she caused or the revenge I could have sought, it was defined by how I rose above it. That day, I went to the boutique, greeted my staff with a smile, and stepped into my studio to design a new collection. I decided to name it Resilience. The pieces were inspired by growth-delicate fabrics with strong, structured lines, symbolizing how beauty and strength can coexist. As I sketched the final design, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Not the kind that comes from success or recognition, but from knowing that I had lived through cruelty, faced it with grace, and emerged whole. Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't payback, it's becoming untouchably at peace.